You don't belong here!
Stand up. You don't belong here. The words struck like thunder, slicing through the gentle hum of boarding chatter. Heads turned. The clink of glasses and rustle of papers froze. Flight attendant Maribel Kane stood rigid in the aisle, her arms folded, eyes narrowed at the elegant black woman seated in 2A. Her tone dripped with disdain, each syllable sharpened to wound. "I paid for this seat," the woman said softly, her voice steady and calm. She didn't rise. She didn't flinch. Maribel leaned closer, her face inches away. "Don't bluff. This cabin is for paying customers." She snatched the boarding pass with a snap, scanned it with theatrical suspicion, then slapped it back against the woman's chest. The sound cracked through the air like a slap of paper and shame. Gasps flickered across the cabin. Victor Halston in 1C chuckled under his breath, already pulling out his phone to record. Ernest Mallory in 1D tapped his cane with approval. "About time someone kept order," he muttered. The woman, Dr. Celine Caldwell, adjusted her blazer slowly. She didn't argue. Her silence was heavier than any defense. Behind her, whispers rippled. Celeste Arroyo in 3A bit her lip, her eyes darting nervously. She wanted to defend Celine, but fear weighed her tongue. Across the aisle, flight attendant Holly Barrett looked down, shame flickering in her eyes. No one moved. No one spoke. Maribel raised her voice louder for the whole cabin. "Security will handle this if you don't move. You people think you can scam your way in here? Not on my flight." Celine finally lifted her gaze. Her eyes locked with Maribel's, calm and unblinking. "Do your job. I belong here." The words weren't loud, but they carried. Passengers shifted. Some smirked. Some pretended not to hear. Some, like Celeste, wrestled with guilt. Then came the echo of firm footsteps. Darren Pike, head of security, approached, tall and stiff in his pressed uniform. His eyes fixed on Celine instantly, suspicion already written across his face. "Is there a problem here?" Maribel folded her arms tighter, triumph curling her lips. "Yes. This passenger refuses to move from a seat she didn't pay for." Celine's jaw remained steady. "Check your manifest." "My name is on it." Darren didn't check. His hand hovered over Celine's shoulder, authority brimming. "Stand up, ma'am, now!" The tension was unbearable. Some passengers leaned in, eager for a spectacle. Others looked away, cowards in silence. Victor whispered gleefully into his phone. "This is gold!" "She's about to get dragged." Celeste's hands trembled. "This isn't right," she whispered, but too softly for anyone to hear. Celine inhaled slowly. Her stillness unnerved Darren. Her refusal wasn't rebellion, it was dignity. Maribel's smirk deepened. "She won't comply. Show her what happens." The cabin held its breath. Darren's hand inched closer. And then, without warning, Maribel lashed out. Her palm cracked against Celine's cheek. The slap echoed like a whip. Gasps erupted. Victor's recording shook in his hands. Ernest grinned, then froze as shame stirred. Celeste clapped her hand over her mouth. Holly turned away, trembling. Celine's head tilted slightly from the blow, but she didn't break. Slowly, she turned her gaze back to Maribel. Her calm eyes burned brighter than rage. For the first time, Maribel's confidence faltered. And the cabin wasn't just watching anymore, it was burning with judgment. The sting of the slap still hung in the air. The sound had echoed so loud it seemed to rattle the very walls of the aircraft. Passengers were stunned into silence, some wide-eyed, some smirking, some pretending they hadn't seen. Then the whispers began. Victor Halston, in seat 1C, leaned back and pulled out his phone. His smirk widened as he angled the camera toward Celine. "Unbelievable," he muttered, pressing record. "This is gold. Can't wait to upload this. Freeloader busted in first class. This'll go viral." A few passengers chuckled nervously, entertained by the humiliation. Ernest Mallory, the elderly man in 1D, shook his head in mock disappointment. "People these days," he said loudly, making sure those around him could hear. "Always trying to take what isn't theirs. Disgraceful." His words carried the weight of bias passed down through generations, unquestioned, unexamined, unkind. Celine remained still, her cheek faintly red where Maribel's hand had landed. She didn't raise her voice, didn't move, didn't even blink at the cameras trained on her. The calm in her eyes was almost frightening, like the silence before an avalanche. A flight attendant across the aisle, Holly Barrett, shifted uncomfortably. She glanced at Maribel, then back at Selene. Her mouth opened as if to speak, but no sound came out. Fear sealed her lips. Fear of losing her job. Fear of becoming the target herself. From the third row, Celeste Arroyo clenched her hands in her lap. She wanted to shout at Victor to stop filming, to tell Ernest to shut his cruel mouth, to call out Maribel for her abuse. But her courage wrestled with her fear. The words pressed against her lips, but they stayed trapped inside. Selene, though silent, seemed to notice. Her eyes flickered briefly toward Celeste's seat, catching her gaze for a heartbeat. It wasn't a plea for help. It was something stronger, an unspoken reminder that dignity doesn't vanish, even under attack. Victor laughed, reviewing his recording. Perfect. I'll title it, Caught in First-Class Fraud. My followers are going to eat this up. He elbowed Ernest, who chuckled. This is what happens when you let standards slip, the old man added, his voice bitter with entitlement. Every cruel word landed in the air like another slap. Every laugh was a fresh wound, and still Selene didn't break. Sir, you'll need to stop recording, Holly whispered timidly, her voice barely above a breath. Victor smirked, not even lowering his phone. What are you going to do? Throw me out? I'm a paying passenger. I've got every right. The power of mockery grew louder. The silence of empathy stayed chained. Complicity filled the air. Then something shifted. A man in seat 4A, tall and dark-skinned with sharp eyes, finally spoke. Malik Rowan. His voice was calm but carried the edge of truth. You should be ashamed, he said loudly so the whole cabin could hear. A woman gets slapped and you laugh? You film? You cheer? That's not order. That's cruelty. Gasps fluttered through the rows. Victor lowered his phone slightly, startled. Ernest stiffened in his seat, muttering under his breath. Maribel turned sharply, her authority suddenly threatened by someone she hadn't expected to speak. Selene turned her head slowly toward Malik. For the first time, her eyes softened, acknowledging the courage he had just shown. But before anyone could respond, Darren Pike, the head of security, raised his voice. His hand still hovered near Selene's shoulder. That's enough. This passenger is being removed now. The businessman's smirk returned. The old man straightened with satisfaction. The air thickened with expectation. And as Darren's hand closed in, passengers held their breath. Would Selene finally be dragged out like a criminal, or would the storm finally break? The cabin bristled with tension as Darren Pike, head of flight security, squared his shoulders. His eyes locked onto Selene Caldwell as though she were already guilty. Stand up now, or I'll have to remove you by force, he said firmly. His words weren't a question. They were a verdict. Selene didn't move. Her calm presence was unsettling, as if she had more control sitting still than Darren did standing tall. Maribel Kane folded her arms, satisfied. See, she refuses to comply. You know what to do. Her voice was laced with triumph. She thought she had won. Victor Halston angled his phone again, whispering gleefully, Oh, this is going to be so good. Security dragging her out? That's premium content. Ernest Mallory tapped his cane lightly against the floor, nodding in approval. Finally, someone taking charge. Back in my day, people knew their place. His words weren't just prejudice. They were the echo of a system that had long excused behavior like Maribel's. The air was thick with complicity. Passengers who disagreed kept quiet. Crew members looked away. Systemic bias wasn't just in Maribel's hand or Darren's glare. It lived in the silence of every witness afraid to speak. Then, a voice rose again. Strong, clear. Malik Rowan leaned forward in his seat. You're about to make a mistake, he said, his gaze fixed on Darren. She has a ticket. She has a right to be here. The only crime happening right now is abuse of power. Gasps rippled. Darren's jaw tightened. Sir, stay out of this or I'll have you removed as well. But Malik didn't back down. No, if you take her, you take me. If you shame her, you shame all of us watching. It was the first crack in the wall of silence. Celeste Arroyo in 3A swallowed hard, courage pushing against her fear. Her hands trembled as she finally spoke. "He's right. This isn't justice. This is bullying." Her voice wavered, but the words were out. Holly Barrett, the quiet flight attendant, shifted uneasily. She glanced at Maribel, then at Darren, then at Celine. Her lips parted, trembling. She is seated correctly?" "Her name is on the manifest." It was barely above a whisper, but it was the first sign of loyalty breaking. Maribel spun toward Holly, her eyes blazing. "Stay in your lane, Barrett. Do you want to lose your job?" The threat hung heavy, a reminder of tribal loyalty inside the crew. Stay silent or be destroyed. But the silence was breaking. Small voices were rising. Celine still hadn't moved. She simply lifted her chin, eyes steady on Darren. The calmness of her defiance carried more power than shouting ever could. Passengers began to murmur. Some nodded in agreement with Malik and Celeste. Others, like Ernest and Victor, sneered. The cabin was no longer united, it was splitting down the middle. Darren's face reddened. Authority was slipping, and he didn't like it. "This is the last warning," he barked. "If she doesn't stand, I will personally drag her down this aisle." The businessman's phone trembled in his hands with excitement. Ernest clutched his cane, eager for the spectacle. But before Darren could take another step, Malik stood. His tall frame towered over the seats, his voice strong. "Then you drag me too." The entire cabin froze. The divide had grown sharper. Some gasped. Some cheered softly under their breath. Others scowled in disgust. And in that moment, solidarity caught fire. Celeste rose halfway from her seat. Holly straightened her back, eyes brimming with quiet courage. A young man in the back row raised his voice. "Leave her alone!" The system was crumbling under the weight of its own bias. The silence that had fueled abuse was collapsing. Darren's hand clenched into a fist. His authority was slipping, but he wasn't ready to surrender. He took a step closer to Celine, his shadow falling over her. "Then so be it," he growled. The cabin held its breath. And with one swift motion, Darren reached down, his hand closing around Celine's arm. Darren Pike's hand clamped down on Celine Caldwell's arm. Gasps ripped through the cabin, sharp and scattered like sparks in a dry forest. Her tablet slid onto the floor with a dull thud, but her posture stayed perfectly straight, unbroken. "This is procedure," Darren announced, his tone flat, his face a mask of authority. "We can't have unauthorized passengers in first class." He didn't say unauthorized. What everyone heard was unworthy. Maribel Kane stood behind him, smugness plastered on her face. "Exactly. You've seen the behavior. She doesn't belong here. Security has every right." She folded her arms as if this humiliation were her personal victory. Victor Halston leaned forward, recording again, whispering gleefully into his phone. "Oh, this is going to be beautiful." The takedown moment. Ernest Mallory nodded solemnly, his cane tapping like a gavel of prejudice. "Order must be kept." The judgment of strangers weighed heavy, pressing down like chains. But Celine's stillness was her defiance. She turned her head slowly toward Darren, meeting his eyes. Calm, steady. A quiet power radiated from her. "You haven't checked the manifest," she said softly. "Do that, and you'll see I belong here." The words hung in the air. A reasonable request, a logical solution. But bias often hides beneath the veil of procedure. Darren didn't even glance at the manifest in his handheld device. His suspicion was louder than facts. "I'll handle it my way," he snapped. Celeste Arroyo, trembling in row 3, found her voice again. "She does belong here. She has a ticket. I saw it. You can't just—" Maribel whirled on her, eyes flashing. "Sit down. Now." Celeste faltered, shrinking back into her seat. The fear of retaliation swallowed her courage. Silence reclaimed her. Celine bent slowly, lifting her tablet from the floor. Her watch slid from her sleeve, its diamond face catching the light. For a moment, the cabin stilled. The shimmer was subtle but undeniable. Victor's phone captured it. Ernest's eyes narrowed. Darren blinked, his grip faltering just slightly. It wasn't just a watch. It was a statement. Rare, powerful, out of place for someone they assumed was a fraud. Maribel noticed too. Her smug grin twitched, almost faltered, but pride forced it back into place. "Jewelry doesn't buy you status," she spat. Celine met her eyes, calm as stone. Neither does cruelty. The words landed heavy. Passengers stirred. A few heads nodded. Judgment was shifting, just slightly but enough to pierce the fog of complicity. Victor zoomed in with his camera. "Oh, this is even better," he whispered. "The fake rich act. They'll eat this up online." But something in his tone had shifted. For the first time, there was doubt. Was this woman really what Maribel claimed she was? Or was she something else? Darren cleared his throat, tightening his grip again. "This is your last chance. Stand, or you'll be removed." The silence in the cabin deepened. Passengers leaned in, caught between complicity and curiosity. Celine lifted her chin. Her voice was low but carried like thunder. "You're going to regret this." The words weren't shouted. They weren't a plea. They were a promise. The cabin froze. Maribel's smile wavered. Darren's hand tightened, but unease crept into his eyes. Even Victor's recording hand trembled. And then, another figure appeared at the cabin door. Captain Jonas Mercer, the pilot himself, stepping into the aisle. His presence was rare, his authority absolute. His sharp eyes scanned the scene in silence, landing finally on Celine. Recognition flickered in his face. A recognition no one else understood. The cabin held its breath. And then the captain spoke. "Release her, now! Release her, now!" The command struck the cabin like lightning. Captain Jonas Mercer stood in the aisle, his uniform crisp, his presence undeniable. Authority radiated from him, calm but absolute. Darren Pike froze, his hand still gripping Celine Caldwell's arm. "Captain, this passenger is—" "She is a customer," Mercer cut in, his voice hard as steel. "Not a criminal. Take your hand off her." Gasps rippled through the rows. Maribel Kane's smug expression faltered for the first time, her lips twitching as if words had failed her. Slowly, Darren released his grip. Celine adjusted her blazer, her composure intact. The faint red mark on her cheek glowed under the cabin light, but her dignity remained untouched. Victor Halston lowered his phone slightly, whispering into it. "This just got better. Even the captain's involved. My followers will go crazy. For him, it wasn't justice. It was entertainment." His self-interest twisted truth into content. Ernest Mallory frowned, leaning toward Victor. "The captain's making a mistake. People like her. They don't belong here. You'll see." His words clung to bias like armor, even as cracks formed. But others felt the shift. Celeste Arroyo straightened in her seat, her hands trembling but her voice clearer this time. "She's done nothing wrong. We all saw it. The only disgrace here is how she's being treated." Some passengers nodded in agreement. Courage was contagious. Mercer stepped closer, his gaze fixed on Maribel. "You slapped her?" His tone was quiet, but each word carried weight. Maribel stiffened. She refused to comply. "I acted to maintain order." "That's not order," Mercer replied coldly. "That's abuse." The words pierced the air. Crew members glanced nervously at each other. Holly Barrett dropped her gaze, shame washing over her. She whispered almost to herself, "She had the ticket all along." Celine finally spoke, her voice calm, deliberate. "You all judged me before you knew who I was. You assumed I didn't belong, but the truth has a way of surfacing." Her words settled like stones in the silence. Passengers shifted, unease prickling their skin. For the first time, the possibility that she was more than they assumed hovered in the air. Victor muttered to his phone, "She talks like she owns the place." He chuckled, but his laugh was shaky. Some part of him feared it might actually be true. Maribel crossed her arms tightly, her pride refusing to yield. "Passengers expect order." "I gave them order." "No," Mercer shot back. "You gave them prejudice dressed as duty." The cabin stirred. Some looked away, ashamed. Others whispered, uncertain. The tide of judgment was turning. Celine leaned back in her seat, adjusting her sleeve. The diamond watch flashed again, brighter under the overhead light. This time, more passengers noticed. A businessman in the back row whispered, "That's not something a faker wears." Doubt spread like wildfire. Maribel's eyes narrowed. She saw the glances, the whispers, the shift in power. And for the first time, fear flickered behind her arrogance. But before the silence could settle, Darren's voice cut through. "Captain, with respect, procedure demands we log an incident report." If she stays, it's on record. Rules are rules. Mercer's jaw tightened. Then you log your behavior too. Every detail, every slap, every threat. The words hung like a blade. Darren's face reddened. Maribel's fists clenched, and then Celine spoke again, her eyes sweeping the cabin. You've all made your judgment. Soon you'll see mine. Passengers shifted, startled. Whispers erupted. Who was she? What did she mean? Victor zoomed in with his camera, whispering, This reveal is going to be massive. The air trembled with suspense. The balance of power was shifting, but no one yet understood just how far it would fall. And as Mercer locked eyes with Celine, recognition deepened. He knew something no one else did. Madam, he said softly, his voice almost breaking. I didn't realize it was you. The words hung in the air like thunder. Madam, I didn't realize it was you. Captain Jonas Mercer's voice carried through the cabin. He didn't shout, yet every ear caught it. Every passenger felt the shift. Maribel Kane's smirk cracked. What do you mean? She asked, her voice sharp, defensive. Mercer's eyes didn't leave Celine Caldwell. You should have told me sooner, he said softly with something close to regret. Then, turning toward Darren and Maribel, his tone hardened. You two don't know who you've just assaulted. Gasps spread like wildfire. Victor Halston nearly dropped his phone. Ernest Mallory's cane froze mid-tap. Celeste Arroyo leaned forward, her heart pounding in her chest. Celine finally moved. She reached into her blazer pocket and produced a black leather wallet. Smooth, polished, unassuming, until she flipped it open. Inside, a platinum badge gleamed with the company crest. Alongside it, an identification card with embossed letters, CEO and majority owner, Caldwell Airlines. The silence shattered. Passengers gasped, hands flew to mouths, whispers collided in shock. Victor stammered into his phone, She's the CEO? Oh my God, I was mocking the CEO. His face drained of color. For the first time, self-interest turned to panic. Ernest's jaw slackened. His prejudice collapsed under truth. Impossible, he croaked. But his shaking hands betrayed him. Maribel's face turned pale. No, this has to be fake. Her voice cracked with fear, no longer sharp with authority. Celine's calm voice cut through. Fake? Would you like to call corporate to verify? The challenge was surgical. The entire cabin felt her power now, the control she had carried all along. Darren stumbled back a step, his authority evaporating. His earlier suspicion now looked like pure blindness. His voice wavered. I didn't know. That's the point, Celine interrupted. Her words were steady, unflinching. You didn't know, and yet you judged. You slapped. You tried to drag me out, not because of policy, but because of prejudice. Her voice carried weight, not rage. Truth spoken calmly was louder than any scream. Passengers nodded, whispers of agreement rolling through the cabin. Celeste's eyes filled with tears, relief and awe. Malik Rowan clenched his fists, not with anger now, but pride. Maribel staggered back. Please, madam, I didn't mean... You meant every word, Celine said sharply, her eyes burning into her. The insult, the slap, the assumption. You thought you could humiliate me because you believed I was powerless. The entire crew stiffened. Holly Barrett's hands shook as she whispered. We all stayed silent. Her guilt was written across her face. Celine turned her gaze across the cabin, sweeping every witness. And the rest of you, how quick you were to judge. How quick to mock. How quick to look away. The shame spread like a stain. Ernest lowered his head. Victor shoved his phone into his pocket, too ashamed to meet her eyes. The balance of power had reversed completely. Celine was no longer a victim in their eyes. She was the one with the authority to end careers, to reshape futures. Maribel swallowed hard, desperation clawing at her words. Please, madam, Her plea was cut off by Mercer's voice. Enough. He turned to Celine, his tone respectful. How would you like this handled? The cabin held its breath. Judgment now rested not in their prejudice, but in Celine's hands. She looked around slowly, her gaze pausing on each face, the cruel, the silent, the sympathetic. Her calm expression didn't falter. You'll see, she said at last. Her voice was steady, her words heavy with promise. Justice is about to begin. The cabin erupted with murmurs, passengers whispering, speculating, fearing. And then the intercom crackled. A voice from corporate headquarters patched through directly to the captain. "Confirm. Is Madam Caldwell on board?" The intercom's static cleared, and a crisp voice filled the cabin. "Confirm. Is Madam Caldwell on board?" Captain Jonas Mercer straightened, pressing his mic. "Yes, Dr. Celine Caldwell is seated in 2A. Gasps tore through the rows. The confirmation didn't just prove her identity, it solidified her authority. The whispers grew louder, passengers leaning into one another like they were witnessing history. Maribel Kane's knees seemed to buckle. Her lips trembled, words tripping over themselves. "Madam, please. I didn't know. If I had—" Celine's gaze was like ice. "You didn't need to know my name to treat me with respect?" The words hit harder than any slap. Passengers nodded quietly, the weight of truth settling on their shoulders. Victor Halston shoved his phone deep into his pocket. His earlier excitement burned away, replaced with humiliation. "I can't post this," he muttered under his breath. "If anyone sees, I'll look like the fool." His opportunism had collapsed into regret. Ernest Mallory gripped his cane tightly, his face pale. "All my life," he whispered, barely audible, "I've judged before knowing. And now—" He trailed off, shame consuming him. Meanwhile, Celeste Arroyo straightened fully, her earlier fear gone. She looked directly at Celine. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling but honest. "I should have spoken louder sooner." Celine's gaze softened slightly at Celeste's words. She didn't smile, but she inclined her head in quiet acknowledgement. Captain Mercer addressed Darren Pike, his voice firm. "Escort Officer Pike, you will file a full misconduct report before we land. Every detail, exactly as it happened." Darren's throat tightened. "Yes, Captain." His authority had dissolved completely, leaving only the weight of accountability pressing down on him. Maribel tried again, desperation dripping from every syllable. "Please, Madam Caldwell, Celine cut her off. "You slapped me in front of witnesses." "You mocked me in front of strangers. You shamed me when I had done nothing wrong. Do you think sorry erases that?" Her calm voice was more terrifying than a scream. Maribel's face drained of color. "No, madam, Celine leaned forward slightly, her eyes like steel. "You will never hold this kind of authority again." The cabin gasped, as if a verdict had been delivered. Holly Barrett clutched her hands tightly, knowing the words sealed Maribel's fate. Victor shifted uncomfortably, whispering, "This is bigger than viral. This is career-ending." His regret deepened. Malik Rowan stood again, his voice steady and strong. "Madam Caldwell, I want to say thank you. Not just for standing, but for showing us all that power doesn't shout, it stands firm." His words carried pride and solidarity. Celine's eyes flicked to him, her expression unreadable. But for the first time, her silence felt like approval. Then came the moment no one expected. Ernest Mallory, the old man, slowly rose with his cane. His voice cracked with age but carried guilt. "Madam Caldwell," he said, "I owe you an apology. I judged you wrongly. I let my prejudice blind me. I see it now." His words trembled with shame and regret, decades of bias unraveling in a single moment. The cabin stilled. Even Victor lowered his gaze, his opportunism drowned in the gravity of Ernest's confession. Celine didn't answer immediately. She let the silence stretch, heavy and deliberate. Her eyes scanned the cabin, making each passenger feel the weight of their own role: mockery, silence, complicity, or courage. Finally, she spoke. "This isn't about me. It's about what you all revealed in yourselves. Some showed cruelty. Some showed silence. A few showed courage. Remember which one you were today." The words seared into every soul on board. And then the intercom crackled again. "Madam Caldwell, corporate headquarters requests to speak with you privately as soon as possible. It concerns disciplinary action against your crew." The cabin buzzed with fear and anticipation. Celine rose slowly from her seat. Her calm, dignified figure was no longer the target of humiliation. She was the arbiter of justice. And as she moved down the aisle toward the cockpit, Maribel collapsed into her seat, her face in her hands. The reversal was complete. The cockpit door clicked shut behind Celine Caldwell. Inside, the hum of instruments mixed with the tense silence of authority shifting. Captain Jonas Mercer handed her the receiver patched to corporate headquarters. "Dr. Caldwell," came the voice on the line, heavy with urgency. "We received reports of misconduct. Please confirm." Celine's voice was calm, precise. "Confirm. A flight attendant assaulted me in front of passengers. Security attempted to forcibly remove me without cause. The crew failed to act. Multiple passengers mocked or filmed." The silence that followed was deafening. Then the executive's voice hardened. "Names!" Celine glanced toward the cabin through the cockpit window. Every guilty face was visible, pale under the cabin lights. She could see Maribel trembling, Darren stiff and sweating, Victor avoiding eye contact, Ernest staring at his cane as if it were a mirror of shame. She spoke clearly. Maribel Kane, Darren Pike, Holly Barrett, silent witness. Victor Halston, opportunist filming. Ernest Mallory, complicit supporter. Others stayed quiet. The words dropped like verdicts. Back in the cabin, Maribel's hands shook as she whispered, "She's naming us." Her pride had melted into terror. Darren's face flushed red. He gritted his teeth, muttering, "This will ruin me." Victor's phone felt heavy in his pocket, like evidence burning against his leg. "I was just recording," he whispered, as if to himself. "I didn't hit anyone. I didn't—" But deep down he knew. He had turned someone's pain into entertainment. Ernest Mallory lowered his head, his shoulders sagging under the weight of decades. His voice cracked in a whisper only he could hear. "All those years, and it takes this moment to show me myself." Meanwhile, Celine's words continued into the receiver. Some showed courage. Celeste Arroyo, row 3. Malik Rowan, row 4. They stood when silence ruled. "They will be remembered differently." The executive's tone softened slightly. "Understood, Madam Caldwell. A formal review begins the moment this plane lands. The individuals you've named will face disciplinary action, immediate suspension, and investigation." Captain Mercer exhaled slowly, relief flickering across his face. For the first time, the weight of accountability was real. Celine returned to her seat, every step measured. The cabin fell silent. Even without hearing the conversation, they knew. Justice was in motion. She sat calm, collected. The roles had flipped entirely. The judge had become the judge. Maribel leaned toward her, voice shaking. "Please, madam, don't end my career. I can change. I swear." Her arrogance was gone, replaced by desperate humility. Celine turned her head slowly. "Change isn't born from desperation. It's born from choice. You never chose respect until you were caught." Maribel's eyes filled with tears. She had no defense. Darren sat stiff as stone, staring straight ahead, already imagining the end of his career. His authority, once his armor, had become his cage. Victor buried his face in his hands, the thought of his recording surfacing online now terrifying instead of thrilling. And Ernest Mallory, trembling, whispered, "Forgive me." But the words felt empty, even to him. Passengers who had stayed silent shifted in their seats, guilt pressing heavy. The cabin atmosphere had transformed from entertainment to reckoning. Celine's voice carried once more, firm but even. "The lesson is simple. Titles don't define dignity. Respect is owed before names are known. You all forgot that. And now, the system you trusted to protect your arrogance will hold you accountable." The silence afterward was suffocating. Then, without warning, the pilot's voice boomed over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to an onboard incident, this flight will be diverted for immediate investigation." Gasps erupted. Diversion meant exposure, news, headlines. Careers ended before the plane even touched down. Maribel's face crumpled. Darren slammed his fist against his knee. Victor cursed under his breath. Ernest closed his eyes in shame. And Celine Caldwell, calm, unbroken, folded her hands neatly in her lap. Justice was only beginning. The announcement hit the cabin like a bomb. "This flight will be diverted for immediate investigation." Panic rippled through the rows. Passengers whispered furiously, eyes darting, imaginations racing about what this meant. Diversions weren't just inconveniences, they were headlines. Careers could collapse mid-air. Maribel Kane gripped the edge of her seat until her knuckles whitened. Diverted? No, no, no. Her voice cracked. She glanced around, desperate for support, but no one moved. Even her fellow crew members avoided her eyes. Darren Pike muttered through clenched teeth. This can't be happening. All because she wouldn't stand up. His words tried to mask fear with blame, but sweat on his brow betrayed the truth. Across the aisle, Victor Halston shook his head violently. If the media gets this, I'm finished. Do you know how this looks? A video of me laughing while the CEO gets slapped? He buried his face in his hands. His self-interest, once entertainment, had curdled into fear. Ernest Mallory sat slumped, his cane resting across his lap. His face was pale, his eyes damp. For the first time in decades, silence didn't shield him. His prejudice had been exposed, and no excuse would cover it. Meanwhile, courage was finding its voice. Celeste Arroyo leaned toward Malik Rowan, her voice hushed but firm. She's changing everything. Did you see how the captain spoke to her? How corporate answered her? Malik nodded, his voice steady. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it sits quietly until it decides to rise. And when it does, everyone has to reckon with it. Passengers nearby listened, their shame deepening. Some lowered their heads. Others shifted uncomfortably, realizing how quickly they had joined mockery instead of defending dignity. Celine Caldwell sat at the center of it all, calm as a storm eye. She hadn't raised her voice once. Her presence was enough. That calm terrified those who had humiliated her and inspired those who had defended her. The intercom crackled again. Corporate headquarters. Dr. Caldwell, diversion will be made to our central hub for formal investigation. Media presence is expected on arrival. We request your guidance for handling the matter. The word struck harder than any slap. Media presence. Exposure wasn't coming, it was waiting at the runway. Maribel's breath hitched. She leaned forward, whispering desperately toward Celine. Madam, please. I beg you. Don't let the media see. They'll destroy me. I'll lose everything. Celine turned her head, her eyes sharp but calm. You should have thought of that before you tried to destroy someone else. Maribel's tears spilled, her pride gone. Darren clenched his fists. This is excessive. We made mistakes, but she's going to ruin us. His voice trembled, fear breaking through anger. Celine looked directly at him. I don't ruin careers. Choices do. The truth was heavier than chains. Darren fell silent, crushed beneath it. Victor muttered bitterly, This is insane. All of us, undone by one woman. Malik turned, his voice strong. No, all of you undone by your arrogance. She just held the mirror. The words cut deep. Even Ernest raised his eyes, shame carved into his wrinkled face. Celine leaned back, her voice carrying across the cabin. This isn't about revenge. Revenge ends with me. But reform, that will outlive all of us. The system that allowed this humiliation must change. And it will start today. Her words rippled like a wave, sinking into hearts. Even those who despised her felt the truth. The cabin went quiet, but it wasn't the silence of complicity anymore. It was the silence of awakening. Then a buzz of a notification lit Victor's phone screen. His video, the one he had filmed earlier, was already leaking online. Somehow in the chaos, it had uploaded to his cloud and spread. His face turned ghost white. It's out, he whispered. The world is already watching. Victor Halston's face went pale as his phone buzzed again. It's out. Oh God, it's everywhere, he whispered, shaking. His recording of Maribel slapping Celine had already spread online, faster than wildfire. Passengers gasped as he scrolled. Headlines were already forming. Black woman humiliated in first class, revealed as airline CEO. Thousands of comments flooded beneath. Some were outraged, some demanded resignations, others tagged news outlets. Maribel Kane's breathing quickened. No, this can't be happening. She clutched her hair, rocking slightly in her seat. Her authority, once absolute, was now a public disgrace. Darren Pike gritted his teeth, but even his stone-like composure cracked. Do you understand what this means? Every decision we made, every word we said, it's recorded forever. Celine Caldwell's calm voice floated above the panic. Yes, forever, which is why truth matters. Because lies fade, but dignity endures. The cabin stilled. Her words weren't just for Maribel and Darren. They were for every silent witness on board. Celeste Arroyo wiped tears from her eyes. People will see this, and maybe next time they won't stay quiet. Her voice was soft, but it carried hope. Malik Rowan nodded firmly. And maybe others will realize power doesn't always look the way they expect. Even Ernest Mallory, wrinkled, shaken, lifted his head. I wasted years of my life thinking like them, he admitted hoarsely. If there's breath in me still, I'll spend it differently. His words were not excuses, but the beginning of repentance. Victor buried his face in his hands. I thought it was just content. Just likes, just views. I didn't realize. I made myself part of the cruelty. His regret was raw, his entitlement burned to ashes. Celine turned to face him directly. Then use your platform to undo what you've done. Let your audience see the full story. Not mockery, but truth. Victor looked up, stunned. Redemption offered instead of ruin. His eyes welled. You'd give me that chance. You'll earn it, Celine replied simply. The balance of power had shifted again, but now toward justice rooted not in destruction, but in reform. Captain Mercer spoke through the intercom, his voice steady. Ladies and gentlemen, as we divert to headquarters, be advised, corporate leadership will board immediately for review. Please remain seated. Whispers erupted, fear spreading once more. The weight of corporate leadership meant more than discipline. It meant decisions that could redefine the airline itself. Maribel collapsed further into her seat. Please, madam, spare me from them. They'll strip me of everything. Celine's gaze was unyielding. You stripped yourself the moment you slapped me. Holly Barrett, trembling, finally found her courage. Madam Caldwell, she said softly. I was silent. I was afraid. But I'll never be silent again. If you allow me, I want to be part of changing this. Celine regarded her for a long moment, then gave a slight nod. Then prove it. Holly's chest rose with relief, her eyes wet. A seed of growth had been planted in her. The cabin was no longer just a space of shame. It had become a classroom. Every passenger was learning a lesson they would never forget. And then the seatbelt lights blinked. The pilot's voice came again. Prepare for landing. Corporate board representatives are already waiting on the tarmac. Gasps filled the air. The reality hit everyone at once. There would be no hiding, no delaying. Their actions were about to be judged on a stage far bigger than the cabin. Maribel shook uncontrollably. Darren stared at the floor, jaw tight. Victor gripped his phone like it was a noose. Ernest clutched his cane, whispering prayers. And Celine Caldwell? She closed her eyes briefly, steady as stone. She wasn't walking into judgment. She was walking into justice. The aircraft's wheels screeched against the runway, a jolt that made every passenger's heart pound harder. But the silence that followed was heavier than the landing. Through the windows, flashing lights glimmered on the tarmac. Black cars waited. Corporate representatives stood in formation, briefcases in hand, suits sharp, expressions unreadable. The airline's top brass had come in person. The intercom crackled. Captain Mercer's voice was steady. Ladies and gentlemen, remain seated. Corporate leadership is boarding now. Fear gripped the cabin. Maribel Kane trembled so violently she could barely unbuckle her belt. This is it, she whispered. Her arrogance was gone, her pride shattered. Darren Pike clenched his fists, his face flushed with panic. This isn't fair. I just followed procedure. But even he knew his words rang hollow. The door opened. 3 executives stepped in, led by Reginald Sloan, the regional vice president. His presence radiated power and urgency. His eyes scanned the cabin, but when they landed on Celine Caldwell, his stern expression melted into respect. He bowed his head slightly. Dr. Caldwell, gasps echoed. Passengers glanced at one another. Even those who still doubted her earlier had no more room for disbelief. Reginald's gaze turned sharp as he looked at Maribel and Darren. You two, stand! They rose shakily. The room bristled with judgment. Passengers leaned in, eager but terrified to witness the verdict. Your behavior has disgraced this airline, Reginald said coldly. Effective immediately, you are relieved of duty. Permanent review begins today. Maribel's knees buckled. Please! I've worked here 15 years. You undid 15 years with one slap. Reginald cut her off. His words were merciless. Darren's jaw tightened, his pride cracking under the weight of accountability. For the first time, his silence was louder than his excuses. Celine rose slowly from her seat, commanding the room without raising her voice. This isn't only about 2 employees. It's about the culture that allowed this to happen. Silence is as guilty as action. Complicity is as dangerous as cruelty. Her words sank into every soul. Crew members bowed their heads. Passengers shifted uncomfortably. The truth couldn't be denied. Celeste Arroyo spoke suddenly, her voice trembling but brave. She's right. We all saw it, and most of us stayed quiet. I did too at first, but never again. We can't just be silent when wrong is happening. Her courage ignited others. Malik Rowan stood tall. We must do better. Every one of us. The lesson isn't for them alone, it's for us. Even Ernest Mallory forced himself to his feet, leaning on his cane. I spent my life excusing prejudice. Today I learned silence makes you part of the harm. If there's time left in me, I'll spend it helping change what I once protected. A hush fell. The transformation was visible. From fear, shame, and arrogance had risen courage, reflection, and awakening. Reginald turned back to Celine. What would you have us do, Madam Caldwell? Celine looked across the cabin, at Maribel, Darren, Victor, Ernest, Celeste, Malik, Holly, and the silent faces beyond. Her gaze was steady, her voice calm. We will build training, not just punishment. Accountability, not just dismissal. Reform that ensures no passenger is ever humiliated again because of who they are. This airline will be more than planes and seats. It will be a place of respect. The cabin exhaled. Her decision was not vengeance, but transformation. Tears streaked down Maribel's face. Darren lowered his head. Victor nodded slowly, already planning to use his platform to spread her message instead of shame. Holly wept quietly, whispering thanks for mercy. Celine Caldwell had not only survived humiliation, she had turned it into systemic change. Then Reginald's voice cut in once more. Dr. Caldwell, the press is waiting outside. They want to hear from you directly. The cabin tensed. Passengers exchanged nervous glances. This was no longer a private reckoning. It was about to become a public revolution. The cabin doors opened with a hiss. Beyond them, floodlights blazed against the night, and rows of cameras flashed like lightning. Reporters shouted, microphones thrust forward. Is it true the CEO was assaulted on her own plane? Will heads roll at Caldwell Airlines? Dr. Caldwell, what message do you have for the world? Every guilty face on board shrank lower into their seats. Maribel Kane wept silently, her career already ashes. Darren Pike sat stiff as stone, staring into nothing. Victor Halston clutched his phone, determined to make amends. Ernest Mallory leaned on his cane, whispering prayers for forgiveness. Celine Caldwell rose. She walked down the aisle with quiet dignity, every step echoing the power she had carried all along. The passengers parted for her like water, their eyes lowered in shame or lifted in admiration. When she stepped outside, the crowd erupted. Cameras flashed. Reporters surged forward. But Celine raised a single hand and the noise stilled. Her voice was calm, steady, carrying over the tarmac with clarity. Tonight I was humiliated by those sworn to serve, slapped, mocked, judged without reason. But this isn't my story alone. It's the story of every person who has ever been underestimated because of their skin, their gender, their status, or their silence. Gasps rippled through the reporters. The weight of her words pressed into the hearts of those watching live across the world. Celine continued, her eyes shining under the lights. I will not seek revenge. Revenge ends with me. But justice will outlive us all. From this moment, Caldwell Airlines will undergo sweeping reform. Mandatory training for every employee, zero tolerance for discrimination, and a new division dedicated to passenger advocacy. Applause erupted, not from the press, but from the passengers who had followed her off the plane. Celeste Arroyo clapped first, tears streaking her cheeks. Malik Rowan joined, strong and proud. Holly Barrett wiped her eyes and followed. Even Victor raised his hands, his shame now tempered by gratitude for a second chance. Celine turned her gaze back to the cameras. We will no longer be an airline that simply flies people. We will be an airline that honors them. The cheers grew louder, swelling with a sense of history being made. Behind her, Ernest Mallory stepped forward shakily. He bowed his head toward the cameras. I was part of the silence, But I promise my last years will be different. She opened my eyes. His confession spread across the media like wildfire, a symbol that change was possible even for the hardest hearts. Maribel and Darren, escorted off separately, disappeared into the shadows, their downfall complete. Not villains in a story anymore, but cautionary tales in a system that would never be the same. Celine Caldwell stood tall, her presence calm but unshakable. This was no longer about one flight. It was about legacy. She looked into the cameras one last time. Power doesn't come from uniforms or titles or loud voices. Power comes from dignity, and dignity cannot be stolen. It can only be surrendered. Tonight, I did not surrender. The press erupted with applause, shouts, and praise. Social media feeds exploded worldwide. Caldwell Airlines was no longer just an airline. It was a movement. And Celine Caldwell, once underestimated, now stood as a symbol of grace, justice, and unshakable empowerment. As the cameras flashed, she walked forward into the night, not a victim of humiliation, but the architect of reform. Her story had begun with a slap. It ended with a legacy.